One of the pieces on the program is Parts for a Floating Space, written in 2002 for saxophone and percussion.
They were premiered at Ohabe Shalom's temple, and so he wrote it to be a site-specific piece. In other words, to use the resonance of this huge temple sanctuary and use the reverberation that's created there. So the form is therefore a little bit open so that you have some space and the piece can breathe. And whenever you perform it, you're supposed to kind of take the acoustics of the hall into consideration when you're thinking about the order of the piece.
Stuart and I have performed this piece a number of times and are excited to perform it again with the composer in residence. Maybe we'll have to experiment this time with our form, as the piece itself is constructed with an open-ended architecture. There are many different parts for both the saxophone and percussion, which can be layered on top of each other in different orders. So in times past, we have performed the piece in the order that it was premiered, but we'll have to perhaps have a conversation with the composer about that for this performance. The saxophone part includes both soprano and baritone saxophone. The soprano saxophone plays many of the melodic lines that right now are in the opening and ending sections. And the baritone saxophone part is used to play a series of multiphonics and a much more aggressive middle section.
Yeah, the saxophone part has 4 parts, one of which is repeated, and then the percussion part has 5 parts, that one of which is partially repeated. They kind of interweave in a mobilic style to create, kind of whatever order you want to put them in, and to kind of create this nice atmosphere.
What's also interesting is the spatial displacement of the performers during the piece. The percussionist is on stage and the saxophonist is to be behind the audience. So having a hall where you can separate the performers is important. The piece begins, well, in the order that we've played it, with solo soprano saxophone, and the percussionist enters the stage after the saxophonist has begun. So it's a neat effect, and the saxophonist also moves around at the back of the hall. So you play all of the melodic soprano parts in one part of the back hall, and all of the baritone parts on the other side of the hall. So it's an interesting acoustic effect created just by where the performers are stationed in the hall as well.
So the instrumentation for the percussion for the different parts is somewhat specified and somewhat open. For one of the parts, this first section, or at least the section we play first, it's vibraphone, which is a standard percussion instrument. Although he does use some extended techniques, particularly bowing the vibraphone, but he also has one point a mouth vibrato. For the second part, it's open instrumentation. So and it's actually a graphically notated score where he just has dynamics specified, but you're just supposed to kind of play as fast as possible on a wide variety of instruments. So he gives an example of break drums and tempo blocks and triangle and gongs and cowbells and wood blocks. I'm not even sure what I'm going to be using in 2 weeks, because I do it differently every time a little bit, just kind of looking through my gear and seeing what I want to use. So that's always fun. Jan never quite knows what I'm going to be using. And then the third part is for djembe solo. Djembe is an African drum, single-headed drum you play with your hands. And then the next section, the fourth section, is for a setup of drums, bongos, tom-toms, and bass drum, and it's just kind of a loud and drummy kind of interlude. It's not very long. And then the last section, you go back and you play the vibraphone again, so it's very much of a kind of a book-ended experience, at least, again, the way we do it.
The last part for saxophone is, as Stuart mentioned, a replication of the opening material for soprano saxophone, except played at half tempo. So you hear the majority of the opening material again twice as slow.
This piece is great because the form is open or somewhat mobile, and it kind of covers the extremes. So some sections are very soft, very spacious. It's all audible, but very quiet and very tender in a way. But then there's some really bombastic parts, like with some really heavy drumming, and also this section where Jan is overblowing on the saxophone on purpose to create these multiphonics. It's very actually aggressive, so it kind of runs the gamut between soft and sweet and kind of in your face, or behind your back, as the case would be with the saxophone. And I think some of the spatial stuff has a real kind of meditative quality to it. The soprano saxophone line lends itself towards kind of introspection and meditation, and just kind of, it's very peaceful. And then the intersections are what's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more active. So we start kind of peaceful and calm, and it kind of builds to some quasi cacophony and even very rhythmic parts, and then it kind of comes back down and ends sweetly.